Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I ask you to bear with me. I'm the last presenter. Just 20 more minutes and we're done for today. So let's get started. My name is Junior Menezes. I'm originally from São Paulo, Brazil. And I'm going to present my research in educational leadership in Brazil. And I will specifically talk about resonant leadership and adaptive leadership to create social change. This is part of my research in undergrad, which I just concluded last March. And is a very important presentation for me because it's the last time I will talk about this research. As from August, I'll be moving to America to start my MA in educational leadership. So let's get started. Thank you. So that's my agenda for today. I'll try to follow this as close as possible. So first I want to start with a question. I want you to go back into your maybe high school time, junior high school and high school. I want you to raise your hand if you had felt any kind of differences between your family members. So maybe your cousins or even between your friends. Did you feel any differences, especially in terms of finances and especially in terms of educational contact? Maybe some of you had access to some kind of classes and some of your family members did not, or some of your friends did not. So if you have had any kind of differences, especially during your high school age, I want you to raise your hand. Okay, almost all of you. So that's how I relate to this study. So I was born in Brazil, and since I was very young, I started noticing differences between me and my family members. So I have this cousin, his name is Heitor, and I was always thinking about him because we would exchange, we are almost the same age, and we would exchange about our educational classes and everything. And Heitor would come and talk to me about his school life. He would come with this impeccable school uniform and talk about his trips abroad, his English classes. He would bring this huge Harry Potter book, and he would talk about reading this book in classes. And I would turn back and think about my experiences that were connected with bullying, drugs, and violence. And I couldn't understand why we had such differences. So from a very young age, I started understanding that I was poor and my cousin was rich. And because of that, we have a completely different educational experience. So that sparkled in me passion towards education and social change. So I think it's important to explain what kind of aspect of social change I'm talking in my research. For me, social change is then the creation of opportunities for marginalized societies or for marginalized students. We are talking about a group of students that are born or are raised in a marginalized society, and how they can receive opportunities and then feel empowered to change their lives. And terms that most of you are probably well known with the term of social mobility. So I'm talking about that kind of social change. Then I started my research doing a very strong study background into the educational complexity of Brazil. Brazil is a huge country, as most of you know. But then I start deeply digging into understanding what kind of educational problems we have in Brazil. And I found the first one to be historical. We were a colony from Portugal, so basically education started being developed from the monarchy and developed from the monarchy, by the monarchy, and to the monarchy only. So if you were born as a peasant, you didn't have access to an education of quality. If you were born part of the monarchy, you would have access to actually quality education. And then I continued to develop another idea of social economic differences. So again, because there were differences into income level, there would be differences into educational achievement. If you are a peasant, you wouldn't be able to have access to education, but actually you didn't need that kind of education because you would have a job and you would be able to live. But if you were born in another family level, you would be able to have access to good education. And that brought other kinds of problems that achieve Brazil even today, which will be more cultural, at a cultural level. We have some Brazilians in the audience, so they can probably confirm, but it's very common into Brazilian culture to say that education is seen as not important. So I try to understand why is education seen as not important. And I discovered so many different aspects. One of them is that in the past, you didn't need to have education to have a good job. Even until today, in Brazil, you can finish your high school and you can get access to a good company and you can create your career without going to a good university. Of course, you're going to be eventually pushed to pursue your studies, but you don't need to do that. Before that, you didn't need to finish your high school and you still could get a job. So even for Brazilian parents, education was seen as not important because their kids could find job and could live their lives. So we created a very strong culture of education is not seen as important. So as you can see, we have an extremely complex of different ideas and inequalities that kind of bring the background of the problem of complexity of education in Brazil. So then, as I pursued my undergrad, I had the chance to deeply learn about leadership. And then I started questioning, is leadership an answer for education in my country? So I would say that those three questions deeply guided my research. First, I thought about leadership, the role of leadership for social change, especially the leadership of school leaders, principals, teachers, people that are working into schools, and are their roles important to create social change? And I also thought about, can that be applied and used as a model? Can we take leadership, apply to other institutions to create positive social change? So those questions guided my research. Also in terms of literature review, I applied two main theories. The first one is resonant leadership from Boyatz and Marquis. Some of you study leadership and have a background in leadership theory. But resonant leaders are leaders that can change us, are leaders that can impact our life, are leaders that are forever connected to us in different, deeper levels. They are addressing complexity, so are leaders that are facing different kind of complex problems in an everyday basis. And I felt that would be an important aspect in theory that I could connect with my study because it talks a lot about complexity. And the second leadership theory is about adaptive leadership. Of course, talking about how to adapt to challenges, but also talking about how we can address traditionalism. So instead of acting the same way to resolve the problems, we are thinking about breaking this paradigm and acting completely different to create new solutions to problems. So, as some of you know, leadership is still considered a new field, but I thought that applying leadership theories to the field of education, especially in Brazil, where we suffer so much in terms of education, would be a completely new, contemporary study that could bring new insights to education in Brazil. So then I want to introduce a little bit about my research designing methods. I was able to do a research in the School of Public Health. Professor Makibuchi is a technical school, public school in Brazil. I would say that I would compare with a community college into the American system. The school was founded in 2006, and more than 6,000 students have graduated from this school. I want to show you also a little bit of the neighborhood where this school is located. So for this, I'm going to show you a quick video. So this is Cidade Tiradentes, which is located in São Paulo, Brazil. It's a huge city in the extreme east side of São Paulo. It has about 300,000 people living there. It's well known in Portuguese. We call it a dormitory neighborhood, which is basically a very cheap place to live. So people live there, they commute to the city every day to work, and they go back there to sleep, basically. It's a very cheap place to live. So that's why there's a huge concentration of people. It's a neighborhood that lacks a lot of infrastructure, and which is basically marginalized. The governments and people itself don't take care of the neighborhood, and they don't have infrastructure. There's only one hospital in the city, there's a few schools. This is a very well-known neighborhood for having strong violence, one of the most violent neighborhoods of São Paulo, and with students being recognized as low achievers in terms of educational achievement level. So the reason why I pick up this place and this school, go back. It's because the School of Public Health, it's very famous in the neighborhood for changing the students' lives and changing the community. So I felt very interesting, how is this school changing the life of these people, especially in those circumstances. So in order to do that, I researched the principal of the school. I had an interview with her. Her name is Valdirene Tizano. She's an educator, have been working with marginalized students for the last 25 years. She has been into the leadership position in the school for the last 10 years, since its foundation. And I went back to Brazil in October last year and I conducted an interview with her. And most of my data is based in literature and also in the interview that I conducted with her. So when I analyzed the data, when I analyzed the interview and the results, I divided into three main themes. And I'm going to discuss a little bit about it. So the first one that was very clear through the interview was the importance of emotional intelligence. We already heard a little bit earlier about that, and it's coming up more and more into academia. And through the interview with Silva, I was able to find different aspects of self-management, relationship management, and social awareness. So it was incredible to see how she's completely aware of her importance as the leader of the institution, and also her awareness of the impact that the students of that school have in the community. So she's completely aware of that, and she works towards bringing the awareness to the whole school and to the other staffs. She's also very connected with the staff in a deeper level. She always says that she knows what's going on with the life of the students and also with her own staff. When I talk about the idea of resilience, I could see a lot of connection with adaptive challenges, with her leadership or her leadership behavior, and also with collective self-confidence. So she gave me an example of a huge project that the school had the opportunity to have. She basically had a partnership with the University of São Paulo, which is the best university in Brazil. And the school was very excited to have this partnership. It would be an amazing opportunity for her school. And then when she went to sign the partnership, the requirements to be able to hold such partnership, she would have to have a huge laboratory, IT laboratory, and she would have to have English-speaking professors and a lot of requirements that she didn't have. So she had a dilemma. Do I sign the contract, knowing that I don't know any of these qualifications and find a way to do it? Or do I say no because I don't have such a way to do it? And she said, I signed it, and immediately I found ways to make that happen. So that really impacted me. And she used the idea of collective self-confidence. So she said, even though there was no way of achieving it, she went to the group and said, let's do it together, let's find ways together to achieve it. And by talking with different institutions, she was able to make the partnership work. And just because of that idea of resilience, of not giving up all the tasks of the work. And the third point, we also heard a little bit about it today, mindfulness. She always talked to me about the importance of herself and others in that relationship. They're talking about mind, body, heart, and spirit, and developing hope and compassion. I saw different examples of being careful of mental health and physical health, not only for herself as a leader, but also for the people around her, and how she was aware of that. And also to have this hope and compassion towards her team. She said to me, Junior, if one professor is pregnant, the whole team is pregnant. If one student is sad, the whole school is sad. So she said, here we are family. and we have a very strong relationship like that. And I think that by seeing this, we are seeing a lot of ideas of mindfulness in terms of her leadership and the school itself. So then I conclude my research bringing a discussion about these points in terms of leadership and in terms of social change. First, in terms of leadership, Silva's example is an example of it was vital for her community. Because of her leadership, she could bring a lot of social change for the community. I saw a lot of theory connection. It was incredible because Silva itself has never heard about adaptive leadership or resonant leadership, but she was an adaptive leader and a resonant leader. But I thought about, wow, it would be incredible to bring those theories and to give even more strength to that leader to change her school. And also about modeling. So yes, I can use the model of leadership and bring that to other schools and empower them to do the same and to create the same kind of social change. And then in terms of social change itself, the community is being developed because of this school. We are talking about students that are getting involved in the community, they are creating a health fair, they are bringing awareness of different health problems, and that didn't happen before. We are talking about students that are changing their lives. I'm talking about a community where students could not even finish their high school, and we are talking now about students that are going to their PhD from that school. So that's really bringing slow, but it's bringing impact to their society. And also the expansion of the school is a clear result of its success. So the school is now in the process of opening 2 other polos in other marginalized societies in São Paulo with the same idea of bringing social change and social development. So my conclusion is that educational leadership has a vital role for changing society in Brazil. And I thought about how can we use that as a tool to empower people working into schools, educators, professors, and how they can use educational leadership to actually bring social change, bring positive social change. And again, we can use that as a model. We can use that as a factor of change. Mm-hmm. Of course, my study has some limitations. I only use that sample into her school, but I'm thinking about expanding that to other schools and to other kinds of society too. I'm also thinking about the limitations of the study in terms of voice. I only heard Silva's voice. I wasn't able to talk with other people in school, especially other employees, even though I was able to see the facts of the results, but I was not able to conduct research with other people. And for future directions, I'm looking into bringing this research into a more comparative level, and even into one country with another country. That's a little bit of future of the research. When I conducted this research, my really deep feeling was that I wanted to be able to encourage other educators that are back in Brazil fighting to change society. My strong hope is that through my study, I want to be able to empower other educators in Brazil that are working with these marginalized, underprivileged students to say that yes, with this power, with this knowledge, they are doing their job and they're changing lives back at home. So that's it for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You actually allowed for us to have a good 5 to 7 minutes of questions.
Okay,
so
great.
without further ado, okay,
yes.
We've got questions.
Thank you, Junior, for your presentation. I was very impressed by Silva's her model of change. I'm just very curious. Does culture play a role on this concept of leadership in her case? Because could it be a resilient thing to have that kind of resilience and that kind of confidence, and can that be adapted to different cultures where those may not be dominant traits?
That's a very good question. Yeah. So I guess yes, there is a very strong, especially in Brazil, that we have a very strong culture of empowered females in schools. That's very common, especially we always had the view of that teacher back in high school that changed our lives. They're mostly women. So it's very common in schools to have leadership. Even in the field of study in Brazil, most of educational leadership developmental studies in Brazil are conducted by women. So I think there is a cultural thing that is part of that. And I haven't compared that with other cultures, especially places that don't play the same cultural aspect, but that would be very interesting to do.
What was your biggest surprise in terms of findings? You know, having interviewed, you knew the community. What did you not expect?
I think what I didn't expect is that she didn't give up. So I couldn't address, but she told me that in the space of 10 years, because it's a public school with no fundings, she was probably facing closed down for about 5 or 6 times. So that the government said, okay, we're going to close the school down. Yeah, just because there was no money, and it's a health field school, so it's quite expensive for the government. And she would fight back and she would resist until the government would back off and she would be able to continue her work. So I was not expecting that because she said it repeatedly happened. So I thought that as if it was me, I would probably just give up and find another position. She said it's natural, but that's not what I wanted for my kids, because she said this is changing their lives. I have students that are studying doctorate, and I have students that are doctor, but they come from this lower income level family. So this is going to change their lives forever. So she said because of that, she wouldn't give up. And that was something that I was not expecting. Thank you. Anything else?
So we also have time for questions for Mr. Basio, as well as Mr. Ishino and Mihara.
So basically it's a question for everybody, but in particular for Mr. Basio. So I was wondering, I mean, we have talked about a lot of very interesting and noble ideas and theorized them. However, I mean, as you all know, there are lots of different societal forces working from many directions. So be it this neoliberal discourse, more, let's say, nationalistic discourses. So, for example, in the context of Italy, where, as you know, a country where I lived for 15 years, and now the Lega Nord has gotten power. How do you see the future of global citizenship education there, and whether this, as a grassroots movement, whether it can actually counterbalance such counter-progressive movements such as the Lega Nord, for example.
But in terms of education, in this moment, global citizenship education is even more needed, you know. And one thing is that the massive wave of refugees coming from other countries is due to conflicts happening in that countries, and this. Most of the Italian people voting, for example, for the political party that you mentioned, it's not that they're not bad people. They're just not educated to understand cultural differences, origins of issues. In this specific case, is it's a journey of pain. What is going through a refugee nowadays? You know, someone escaping the war is coming to your country because there someone is dying. Their family is dying, you know, and then so preparing the future generations to have a multicultural respect, awareness about the issues going on worldwide, that would also help them to be better prepared in these cases, right? But if you don't have an education that looks at the global in a way that opens up students' minds to be prepared to actually deal with the situation, then what happens is hate, is fear about, you know, other people and other cultures, is this culture of us versus them, that we really need to change through educating for global citizenship, where educating for global citizenship means helping students to become more aware of the interconnectedness of nowadays issue, because if a war happens tomorrow here, then you will be the refugee going to another country, right? And so if you think in that way, then that's when we help our students to really become so-called global citizens. So this is what we need, specifically in Italy in this political moment. In addition to that, and I conclude, I think nowadays the left political parties, not only in Italy, but I believe also in the United States as well, and in other European countries, forgot a little bit about certain important aspects. For example, supporting the working class, supporting those who are really living on a salary. And so there is also this point that has to be stressed. So all of this together really makes educating for global citizenship really, really, really important at this specific point in time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for
Grazie.
Thank you.
I have a question actually for Mr. I found the topic of bringing in so I found the topic of bringing in language arts subject into the English curriculum at the high school so interesting, so fundamentally just interesting that I was wondering about the kind of the effects, maybe if there could be any negative effects to that as well in terms of creating some sorts of pressures. I think his question before was societal or parental pressures in terms of English. And so I'm also wondering, with an extra emphasis, especially now due to the global program, super global program, what kind of extra pressures that could give to the students in terms of seeing English as even more now because of wanting to put this English speaking world of knowledge into practice after graduating. If it could put high-level English speakers on more of a pedestal, or create a little bit more pressure or divide between students of varying levels.
Thank you very much. From my perspective, because in terms of Japanese education, I mean, as a language education, there is basically nothing has been taught logically. So to start this language education, basically benefits that student can get, because they can get the knowledge to communicate with people throughout the world, and they can get more perspective, which is a very different background, which is based on more low context culture. And also they can understand what they are thinking of through a knowing their language itself, I mean, logically control their language, and they have more precise communication within Japanese people. So as long as I can imagine, there is basically the benefit. Of course, there is pressure, but because without understanding the sense of the language arts, is quite, actually for myself, it's quite hard, because when I went to London and tried to write a paper, the teacher said, "Oh, your words are very kind of emotional and doesn't have any topic sense in the soul." But I couldn't understand because I haven't got any sense of language arts. So it takes quite a long time to understand what the teacher expected me to on the writing. So in that sense, I think having language is very beneficial for basically the Japanese students, and so I cannot imagine in terms of something precious on
Actually, if I could add, what I noticed was that because of language arts, the gap between the higher level students and lower level students reduced, because the higher level students were higher level because they could intuitively understand language. They had this ability to be able to grasp the language itself, whereas the lower level students, because they weren't even proficient in their first language, they weren't able to transfer those skills. So in a sense, it equips lower level students with skills that higher level students instinctively had. And it's I'm not going to say there's no gap. There is a gap, but it's getting smaller. And yeah.
Thank you.
All right.